In this video, we'll be talking about how to actually prepare for a chartered accountant exam. And this is applicable for each of the four key modules, so Fin, Tax, Math, and Audit. Capstone's a little bit different, so this doesn't actually apply to Capstone, but each of the other four modules are exactly the same. They're the same in the marking structure, in terms of the timeline, in terms of the general approach and how you should study for it. So this video is equally applicable for all four of those modules. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is how those exams are actually marked, because this is what we should be looking at first, because this should determine your approach to it and where you should allocate your time and efforts. So all of the four modules are comprised of 100 marks, of which 20 comes from the combined score of 3 online assessments or online quizzes, and 80 marks come from the exam. So what I tell people is to primarily focus on the exam. The quizzes don't really matter that much, and the reason is there's 3 of them. Each of them are worth less than 7 marks each. And generally, even if you don't try that hard, you can generally get 5 out of 10. It's not that hard. And the difference between getting a 5 out of 10 on all of your quizzes and getting a 10 out of 10 on your quizzes really isn't that much. So it's the difference between 10 and 20 marks on your online assessment. Now, it's always much better to do much better in your final exam. So for example, if you get 80% in your final exam and barely pass your online assessment, you're going to do much, much better than someone who gets 80% in their online assessment and only gets 50% in their exam. So my advice is, even if you don't do well on your first or second or third online assessment, don't stress. They don't really matter that much. We do have some quiz preparation material for you to practice the online quizzes and get an idea of how to actually prepare for it, what kind of questions they've asked in the past, and get a feel for it, which should help you get a pretty good mark. But overall, your focus should be on the exam, and that's what our course actually walks you through is learning all the key content that you need to know, having all the materials and templates and things like that you need to know, and then how do you actually get the best possible mark for your exam. So if you look in the course down below, you'll see that the first element of the course is actually just core content. So for example, in the Fin course that we have online, we've got all these videos here which go through each of the topics and explains it in detail. Now these make reference to both the templates and also the CSG and also the notes that we provide. So we recommend that you generally start off your study with the notes, which you can also download from our website. These are also available with the general tax, Fin, audit, and math notes that you can download from our store as well, which also come with exam templates, work papers, and all the key documents that you really need. But in terms of just learning the key content, you've really got 2 options. So number 1 is you read the CSG in detail. Now obviously this is the preferred approach, because the CSG I think is actually really well written. It's got a lot of really good information in there. The only problem is it's way too much information for you to actually digest in the relatively short assessment period. If this was over 6 months, it would be a perfect resource, but we just don't have the time to go through every single detail in the CSG. I still refer back to it in my professional career. I find it's a really good resource, but it's just too much detail. So this is why I recommend a combination of using the summarized notes, which you can download from the course, which are also available in our critical notes files. So a combination of that and actually watching our videos. So really understanding the core content before you proceed any further. So the next advice is to actually stick to the timeline. So in each of the CSGs, so tax, fin, audit, math, etc., in the towards the front of the CSG, they actually provide you with this timeline. And what this timeline is a relatively accurate week by week idea as to where you should be up to in terms of what module you need to understand. So by the end of week 1, you should have finished, for example, in this tax module as an example, you should have finished income tax by week 1. It also gives you a relatively good idea as to how many hours it would take to actually read that CSG chapter. Now keep in mind, our videos are condensing this, so 14 hours, we're condensing this into about an hour or maybe an hour and a half for that video. So it's so much more efficient to actually watch our videos, read our notes, and follow this guide as opposed to actually reading through the CSG. So that's our next piece of advice, is actually to follow this timeline. Make sure you stay up to date. It's not the end of the world if you fall behind. Many people do because of work obligations, etc. That's not really a big deal. Honestly, even if you're at the very last week, if you are in week 11, week 12, right before your study break, you can still do really well in your exam, even if you've failed your online assessments at this point. The reason is you can cram as much as you can in these last few weeks. You can follow our videos and really understand all the knowledge in a really short period of time, and then just understand all the exam techniques, which we'll talk through in our module. And if you can do that and keep practicing those exams over and over and over and over and over again, because they do tend to repeat the kind of same processes, you are going to do pretty well. So that's just our next advice, is just stick to timeline, just so you do have time to actually absorb the information slowly and not just absorb it all at once and forget it and don't really understand it. So our final advice is just to understand the exam structure as much as possible. Now you can leave this a little bit later towards the end of your module, and just for the first 10 weeks or so, just focus on learning the content, understanding the content, getting through your online assessments. But really 3 or 4 weeks out from your exam, what I would actually do is, stop learning the content, just focus on doing exam papers. Don't worry about doing the questions in your CSG by chapter. They're not worth the time. What is important is doing as many exams as you can, because as I mentioned before, the exams tend to follow the same. So they're not going to have the same question every single year. But what you'll see is if you've done about maybe 4 years worth of exam papers, they will cycle the same questions in between. So you might have, for example, one exam has 4 multi-part questions. So let's say on average, 3 or 4 questions within that. So we'll call it 16 questions per exam paper. If you do, say, 16 times 5, 5 years worth, that's about 80 questions. And there's probably going to be about, 50 to 60% overlap throughout that. So, they're going to change the numbers, but you'll have an idea about all the different types of questions they can answer. You'll have been able to practice them using a template. So we're using the template that we give you in the critical file. For example, in Fin, we'll give you the journal templates, and in tax, we'll give you the tax rec and so forth. So actually practicing, writing those out, learning how to use those templates, learning the techniques behind that. Even if you don't really know the content at that point, just by being able to repeat those questions, repeat the process, and learning how to do it, you can do really well on an exam. And that's the unfortunate reality, is someone who understands the structure of how to approach a CA exam is actually going to do better than someone who knows the content better but doesn't know how to approach the exam. And that's what we're going to teach you in this course. So what I would do now is just follow the timeline, start learning the key content videos, and just really spend your first 10 weeks focusing on that. And after that, focus all of your time just learning the exam techniques, doing past papers, which you can get from our critical files, and watching our videos around exam preparation as well. So thank you for your time, and thank you for purchasing the content, and I look forward to learning more of the content with you in the videos below.